The night sky over Draker Prime glowed with 3 moons, casting silver light across the massive crystal palace. Inside the grand throne room, King Tamine sat with his queen, Huna, discussing matters that had troubled them for centuries. They were dragons, mighty and ancient, with scales that shimmered like gold and sapphire under the palace lights. Their empire stretched across 12 star systems, and their people looked to them for strength and wisdom. But despite all their power and glory, something was missing. For 300 years, they had ruled without an heir. The dragon bloodline carried an old curse, one that prevented them from having children. They had consulted the greatest healers and mystics across the galaxy, but no solution had been found. Tonight, like many nights before, they sat in silence, feeling the weight of their childless throne. Suddenly, the palace alarms began to sound. Guards rushed into the throne room, their faces showing confusion rather than fear. Commander Juno, the head of the royal guard, bowed low before speaking. His voice was steady but puzzled as he reported that an unknown ship had appeared in their atmosphere. The strange vessel had passed through every defense system as if they were made of air. No weapons could lock onto it, and no communication signals could reach it. King Tamine stood from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the marble floor. His golden eyes narrowed as he prepared for potential danger. Queen Huna rose beside him, her elegant neck arched high, ready to protect their kingdom. They had fought countless battles and faced many threats. But something about this felt different. This did not feel like an attack. The palace doors opened slowly, and a figure walked through. He was tall and slim, with skin that seemed to shimmer between solid form and pure energy. His robes flowed like liquid starlight, and his eyes held the depth of galaxies. This was Ambassador Kellen of the Viralis Collective, a race so ancient and advanced that even dragons spoke of them with respect. The Viralis were known to travel between dimensions, studying civilizations, and occasionally intervening when they deemed it necessary. In the ambassador's arms, wrapped in a blanket that glowed with soft blue light, was a tiny creature. King Tamine and Queen Huna stepped down from their thrones, their curiosity overcoming their caution. As they drew closer, they realized what the ambassador carried. It was a baby, but not a dragon hatchling. This was something they had only seen in ancient records and distant observations. This was a human infant. Ambassador Kellen spoke with a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. He explained that this child came from a planet called Earth, located in a distant corner of the galaxy. A terrible cosmic disaster had destroyed that world, tearing apart its magnetic fields and making the surface uninhabitable. The Viralis had been observing Earth for generations, fascinated by humanity's resilience and spirit. When a catastrophe struck, they had managed to save only one life, this baby boy. The ambassador continued, saying that ancient prophecies had guided them to bring the child here, to Draker Prime, to the court of the Dragon King and Queen. The baby's name was Jaiwin, given to him by his birth parents before they perished. Ambassador Kellen explained that humans were special among the younger species of the galaxy. They were fragile, yes, with soft skin and no natural weapons. They could not breathe fire or fly through space. But they possessed something remarkable, an ability to adapt, to learn, to overcome impossible challenges through creativity and determination. King Tamine looked at the tiny human with doubt in his ancient eyes. Dragons were warriors, creatures of immense strength and power. Their scales could withstand plasma weapons, and their breath could melt through starship hulls. This little creature seemed so impossibly delicate, so vulnerable. How could such a being survive in a world built for dragons? How could it ever be strong enough to matter in their empire? Then something unexpected happened. Baby Jaiwin, barely 6 months old, reached out his small hand and grabbed onto one of King Tamine's massive claws. The child's tiny fingers wrapped around the dragon's talon, which was larger than the baby's entire hand. Instead of crying or showing fear, the baby smiled. His brown eyes sparkled with curiosity, and he made happy sounds, completely unafraid of the enormous dragon before him. Something stirred deep within King Tamine's heart, something he had not felt in centuries. He looked at Queen Huna and saw the same emotion reflected in her eyes. The queen moved closer, her movements gentle despite her massive size. She extended one claw carefully, and the baby grabbed it too, laughing with pure joy. In that moment, something changed between them. Ambassador Kellen watched this interaction with knowing eyes. He told him that the child carried within him the entire spirit of humanity, the hopes and dreams of species that had reached for the stars despite being born without wings. He said that raising this child would not be easy, that many would question their decision, but that Jaiwan represented something important. He was a bridge between two great species, a chance for the dragons to learn from humanity just as the child would learn from them. The royal court had gathered by now, watching from the sides of the throne room. Nobles and advisors whispered among themselves, their voices carrying doubt and concern. General Doyen, a scarred veteran of many wars, stepped forward to voice his objections. He argued that a human child could never understand dragon ways, could never command respect from their warriors, could never be suitable as a royal heir. High Priestess Nari added her concerns, speaking of the practical difficulties and the potential complications for the succession. But Queen Huna was no longer listening to the doubters. She carefully took baby Jaiwan into her arms, cradling him against her chest with a gentleness that surprised even herself. The baby settled against her warmth, yawning sleepily, completely trusting. Her maternal instincts, dormant for so long, awakened like a fire rekindling. She looked at her husband, and he saw in her eyes a determination that matched his own growing feelings. King Taemin made his decision. His voice rang out across the throne room, silencing all whispers and objections. He declared that they would adopt Jaiwan as their son, as the prince of the Dravic Empire. He stated that blood did not determine family, that love and choice matter more than species or origin. Any who opposed this decision would need to bring their concerns directly to him, and he would hear them, but his mind was made. Ambassador Kellen smiled, satisfied that the prophecy was unfolding as foreseen. Before departing, he left behind several devices of Viralis technology. These advanced machines would monitor Jaiwan's health and adjust the palace environment to suit human needs. The equipment could modify atmosphere, temperature, and even gravity in specific rooms to ensure the baby would grow healthy and strong. The ambassador promised that the Viralis would check on the child's progress but would not interfere with his upbringing. This was now entirely in the hands of the Dragon King and Queen. As a mysterious ship lifted silently into the night sky and vanished between dimensions, Queen Huna carried little Jaiwan to what would become his nursery. The room had already been modified by the Viralis technology, making it perfectly suited for human life. She sat in a specially prepared chair, holding the baby close, and began to sing. Her voice carried an ancient dragon lullaby, one that mothers of her kind had sung to their hatchlings for thousands of years. King Taemin stood in the doorway, watching his queen and their new son. He knew that challenges lay ahead, that not everyone would accept this decision easily, but as he watched Jaiwan drift peacefully to sleep in Huna's arms, he felt certain they had made the right choice. This tiny human had already conquered the hearts of two of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, not with strength or fire, but with simple, innocent trust and love. The palace settled into quiet as the night deepened. In nurseries across the empire, dragon hatchlings slept in their heated nests. But in one special room, under the watchful eyes of the most powerful parents in 12 star systems, a human baby slept peacefully, beginning an extraordinary journey that would change the fate of an entire empire. Prince Jaiwan's story had begun. 10 years had passed since that night when Ambassador Kellen brought baby Jaiwan to the Dragon Palace. The small human infant had grown into a bright and energetic boy, and the Crystal Palace of Draker Prime had transformed to accommodate him. Special rooms had been built with controlled environments where the air, temperature, and gravity were adjusted perfectly for human needs. The Viralis technology worked quietly in the background, ensuring that Jaiwan could live comfortably among beings much larger and stronger than himself. Prince Jaiwan's chambers were located in the eastern wing of the palace, connected to his parents' quarters by a private hallway. His room was filled with books, star maps, holographic displays, and training equipment. Unlike dragon hatchlings who grew slowly over many decades, Jaiwan matured quickly by dragon standards. What seemed like rapid growth to the dragons was simply normal human development, but it meant that his parents treasured every moment. knowing that their son's childhood would pass much faster than they were accustomed to. King Tamine had become a devoted father in ways that surprised the entire court. Every morning, before attending to matters of the empire, he would spend time with Jaiwin. They would sit together in the king's private study, a massive room with walls covered in screens, showing every corner of the 12 star systems. The king's enormous form would curl protectively around his small son as they studied together. Tamine taught Jaiwin about strategy, history, and the responsibilities of leadership. The king explained how their empire had been built not just through military might, but through diplomacy and wisdom. He showed Jaiwin how to read star charts, how to understand the complex relationships between different species and territories, and how to think several steps ahead when making decisions. Tamine never spoke down to his son or simplified things because Jaiwin was human. He taught him as he would teach any heir to the throne, with high expectations and genuine respect. Queen Huna made sure that Jaiwin never felt like he was less than anyone else because of his species. She celebrated every milestone in his development with the same joy and ceremony that dragon families showed for their hatchlings. When Jaiwin took his first steps, she declared a palace holiday. When he spoke his first words, she commissioned a monument. When he started his formal education, she personally selected the finest tutors from across the empire. One of these tutors was Master Miho, a dragon scholar known throughout the galaxy for his wisdom and patience. Miho had initially been skeptical about teaching a human child, but Jaiwin's quick mind and endless curiosity won him over within weeks. The old scholar taught Jaiwin languages from dozens of species, philosophy from ancient civilizations, and scientific principles that govern the universe. Miho often remarked to the queen that Jaiwin learned faster than any student he had ever taught, absorbing information like a sponge, and making connections that even surprised his teacher. Despite all the studying, Jaiwin's childhood was not without fun and friendship. His best friend was Princess Yuna, the daughter of Duke Jinwu, one of King Tamine's most trusted advisors. Yuna was a young dragon with beautiful blue scales that sparkled like sapphires in the light. She was only a few years older than Jaiwin in human terms, though dragon aging made such comparisons complicated. What mattered was that they were both children, and they got along wonderfully. Yuna found everything about Jaiwin fascinating. She loved how he could squeeze through spaces too small for dragons, how he could manipulate objects with his flexible fingers in ways that claws could not, and how he approached problems differently than dragon children did. Together, they explored the vast palace grounds, discovering secret passages and hidden gardens. They got into the kind of innocent trouble that all children find, whether they have scales or skin. One memorable incident involved the palace kitchens, where Jaiwin and Yuna attempted to make a surprise dessert for Queen Huna's birthday. Dragons typically ate their food raw or superheated, but Jaiwin had been reading about human cooking techniques from Earth's archive databases. The experiment ended with smoke filling 3 corridors and both children covered in a sticky substance that was supposed to be cake. The kitchen staff found them trying to clean up the mess, looking guilty but laughing uncontrollably. Queen Huna, instead of being angry, joined in their laughter and helped them clean up, touched by their thoughtful intention. However, not everyone in the palace or the empire accepted Jaiwin as readily as his parents and friends did. Lord Sangwoo, a traditional noble with dark green scales and ancient lineage, frequently voiced his concerns in council meetings. Sangwoo argued that the succession line was sacred, that a human prince could never truly understand what it meant to be dragon, and that Jaiwin's inability to fly, breathe fire, or survive in space without protection made him unsuitable as a future ruler. These objections reached Jaiwin's ears despite his parents' attempts to shield him. The young prince heard the whispers, felt the skeptical stares from some nobles, and understood that many questioned his right to be called prince. Instead of becoming discouraged, these challenges made Jaiwin more determined to prove himself worthy of the title his parents had given him. He began training in combat with Commander Juno, the head of the Royal Guard. Juno was a battle-scarred warrior who had initially agreed to train the prince only out of duty to the king. The commander expected Jaiwin to fail, or give up quickly when faced with the physical demands of military training. After all, how could a small human compete with dragon warriors? But Jaiwin surprised him. The prince could not match dragon strength. That was true. He would never be able to tear through metal with his bare hands or withstand the heat of plasma weapons with his skin. But Jaiwin learned to use technology, strategy, and speed to compensate for his physical limitations. He studied fighting styles from across the galaxy, adapted them to his human body, and trained with intensity that impressed even the hardest veterans. Juno began to notice something important. Where dragon warriors relied on their natural advantages, Jaiwin learned to use everything around him. He turned his environment into a weapon, used misdirection and tactics, and thought 3 moves ahead in every sparring match. One day, during a training session observed by several nobles, Jaiwin managed to defeat a dragon opponent twice his size, using a combination of technology and clever positioning. The nobles watching fell silent, their skepticism shaken. After the match, Commander Juno addressed the observers directly. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent centuries in military service. He told them that humans had survived on their home world, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they adapted. Where dragons relied on might, humans used intelligence. That was not weakness. Juno declared that was a different kind of strength, one that the Empire could benefit from. On Jaiwin's 10th birthday, King Taemin made a decision that shocked the entire Empire. During a ceremony broadcast across all 12 star systems, with representatives from hundreds of worlds watching, the king officially named Jaiwin as Crown Prince and heir to the Dravic throne. The announcement sparked heated debates in some quarters, but the king's word was law. Jaiwin stood on a raised platform, wearing formal armor that had been specially designed for his human form. The armor was made from the same advanced materials used for dragon royal guards, but crafted to fit his smaller frame. He looked tiny next to his massive parents, but he stood straight and proud, his young face serious with the weight of what was happening. When it came time for him to speak, Jaiwin's voice was clear and steady. He addressed the billions watching across the Empire, acknowledging that he was different from them. He admitted that he could not breathe fire, could not fly with wings, could not survive in the void of space without protection. But he told them that his parents had given him something more valuable than any of those abilities. They had given him love, education, and trust. He promised to spend his entire life proving worthy of those gifts and of the title Crown Prince. Queen Yuna watched her son with tears glistening in her eyes, something that surprised many who watched. Dragons were not known for showing such emotion publicly, but she made no attempt to hide her pride and love. King Taemin placed one massive claw gently on Jaiwin's shoulder, a gesture of blessing and support that was captured in images broadcast throughout the Empire. That night, after all the ceremonies and celebrations ended, Jaiwin sat with his parents in their private quarters. He was exhausted but happy, still processing everything that had happened. Queen Yuna held him close, and King Taemin wrapped his tail protectively around both of them, creating a safe circle of family. Jaiwin asked them if they ever regretted their decision to adopt him, if the criticism and complications made them wish they had refused Ambassador Kellen's gift. Both parents answered immediately and firmly. They told him that he was the greatest blessing their long lives had ever received, that every challenge was worth it, and that they could not imagine their empire or their hearts without him. As Jaiwin fell asleep that night, safe between his dragon parents, he felt completely loved and accepted. The road ahead would have more challenges. He knew that. But he also knew he had the support of the 2 most powerful beings in 12 star systems, and the love of a family that had chosen him not because of what he was, but because of who he could become. 7 years had passed since Jaiwin's coronation as Crown Prince. At 17 years old, he stood tall and confident, a young man who had earned respect through action rather than birthright. His combat skills were legendary among the palace guards. His strategic mind impressed the military commanders, and his diplomatic abilities made even the oldest nobles take notice. Yet despite all his achievements and the genuine love of his adoptive family, questions haunted him in the quiet moments. Late one night, Jaiwin stood alone at the observation deck of the royal flagship, staring at a holographic display of star systems. His fingers moved across the controls, zooming in on one particular area of space. There, marked in faded colors on the map, was a solar system labeled as quarantined and uninhabitable. It was a location of Earth, his birth world, the planet he had never seen with conscious memory. The questions had been growing stronger lately. Who were his biological parents? What kind of people were humans when they lived together as a civilization? Did he have siblings, grandparents, a whole family that perished in a catastrophe? What were human cities like? Their art, their music, their dreams. The archives in the palace library contained some information about Earth, but it felt incomplete, like reading about a place rather than understanding it. These thoughts intensified after Jaiwin intercepted a coded transmission by accident while working on communication systems. A remote research station had been studying the ruins of Earth, and they had discovered something significant. Underground vaults had been found, sealed facilities that survived the cosmic disaster. Inside these vaults were databases, records, and fragments of human civilization preserved through catastrophe. The discovery had been kept quiet, deemed unimportant to the Empire's current concerns. But to Jaiwin, it was everything. This was a chance to understand where he came from, to connect with a heritage he had never known. He struggled with the decision for days, unsure if seeking his past meant he was ungrateful for his present. Finally, he knew he had to speak with his father. King Taemin was in the war room when Jaiwin found him, studying defensive formations against Kretak raiders who had been attacking border systems. The king looked up as his son entered, and immediately his experienced eyes noticed something troubling Jaiwin. Taemin dismissed the other advisors with a gesture and gave his full attention to the prince. Jaiwin explained everything: the intercepted transmission, the discovery on Earth, and his desire to visit what remained of his birth world. He spoke carefully, trying to make his father understand that this was not about rejecting his dragon family. He just needed to understand the missing piece of himself. King Taemin was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying his son's face. Then he spoke with the wisdom of his centuries. He told Jaiwin that he understood, that he had been expecting this conversation for years. The king said that Jaiwin feared he did not belong, feared that without knowing his origins he was incomplete. But Taemin wanted his son to understand something important. Knowing where you came from did not define where you belonged. Before Jaiwin could protest, Queen Huna entered the war room. She had been listening from the doorway, and now she came to stand beside her husband. Her voice was gentle but firm as she told Jaiwin that he had every right to know his heritage. She said they had always known this day would come, and they would support him completely. They would arrange an expedition to Earth immediately. The journey to Earth's sector took 2 weeks aboard the fastest ship in the royal fleet. Accompanying Jaiwin were Princess Yuna, who had grown into a brilliant diplomat and remained his closest friend, Commander Juno, and Master Miho. The crew also included scientists and archaeologists who would help excavate and study the underground vaults. As their ship approached the scarred world, Jaiwin felt his heart beating faster. Earth hung in space like a wounded giant, its surface showing the terrible scars of the quantum cascade that had torn apart its magnetic field. The oceans had receded, the green continents had turned brown and gray, and storms large in entire countries raged across the surface. Yet life was slowly returning. The planet was healing, though it would take thousands of years to fully recover. They landed near one of the preserved underground facilities, a massive complex built deep beneath what had once been a mountain range. The entrance had been unsealed by the research team, and preservation fields kept the interior safe from the harsh surface conditions. As Jaiwin walked through the corridors, emergency lights flickered on automatically, responding to movement after decades of silence. The archives were vast, containing more information than Jaiwin could absorb in months. There were digital libraries with millions of books, music, films, and art. There were records of human history, from ancient times to the final days before the catastrophe. Jaiwin spent hours each day exploring, learning about humanity's struggles and triumphs, their wars and peace, their capacity for both terrible cruelty and overwhelming kindness. Master Miho helped him process the information, providing context and perspective. The old scholar was fascinated by human culture, often commenting on how similar human philosophy was to dragon wisdom, yet approached from completely different angles. Princess Yuna sat with Jaiwin through the difficult discoveries, the records of violence and suffering that marked human history, helping him understand that every species had darkness in their past. Then Jaiwin found what he had been unconsciously searching for. In a database of personnel records from a space station called Harmony Station, he discovered two names that made his hands tremble: Kyungmin and Suji, scientists who specialize in quantum mechanics and astrophysics. They had been working on the station when the cascade began, and their last recorded action was launching an escape pod containing their infant son. With shaking fingers, Jaiwan accessed their final transmission. A holographic recording appeared, showing a man and woman in their 30s, both wearing research uniforms. They looked exhausted and terrified, but their faces showed determination. Behind them, alarms were flashing, and the station was clearly breaking apart. The woman, Suji, held a baby in her arms. She kissed the infant's forehead and spoke directly to the recording device. Her voice was steady despite the tears on her face. She said they were sealing their son Jaiwan in the emergency pod with a beacon and all the life support they could spare. She told him that they loved him more than words could express, that they were sorry they could not be with him, and that wherever he ended up, whoever found him, they hoped he would live a full and happy life. The man, Kyungmin, appeared next to his wife. He reached out to touch the recording device, as if he could reach through time to his son. He told Jaiwan to be brave, to be kind, and to make them proud. He said that humanity's greatest strength was not in their technology or their achievements, but in their ability to love across any distance, any difference, any barrier. Then the recording ended abruptly as the station's power failed. Jaiwan stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. These were his birth parents, people he had never known but who had loved him enough to sacrifice everything for his survival. Princess Yuna moved close, placing a gentle claw on his shoulder, offering silent support. For days afterward, Jaiwan absorbed everything he could learn about Kyungmin and Suji. They had been brilliant scientists, respected by their colleagues, known for their kindness and their dedication to peaceful space exploration. They had been married for 8 years before Jaiwan was born, and by all accounts, they had been overjoyed to become parents. On the last day before returning to Draker Prime, Jaiwan stood at the site of Harmony Station's crash landing. The wreckage was still there, partially buried in the sand. He placed a memorial marker, a crystal pillar that would last for millennia, engraved with his parents' names and a message thanking them for their sacrifice. The journey home gave Jaiwan time to process everything he had learned. He understood now that he had been blessed twice. His birth parents gave him life and the genetic heritage of humanity's resilience. His adoptive parents gave him purpose, education, and unconditional love. He was not caught between two worlds. He was the bridge connecting them, carrying the best of both. When the ship entered Draker Prime's orbit, Jaiwan requested a public address. The broadcast reached every corner of the Empire, and billions watched as the young prince spoke with new conviction. He told them about his journey, about discovering his birth parents' sacrifice, and about understanding what it truly meant to be human. He explained that humanity's legacy was not about physical strength, but about the strength to adapt, to hope, and to love without limits. He declared that he was human by birth and dragon by choice, that he carried a heritage of two great species, and that he would serve the Empire with everything he was. The response was overwhelming. Even Lord Sangwoo, who had criticized him for years, publicly acknowledged that Jaiwan had proven himself worthy of the crown. That evening, Jaiwan sat with King Taemin and Queen Hyuna in their private quarters. He thanked them for giving him the freedom to seek his past, and he told them that the journey had only strengthened his certainty about where he belonged. He was their son, completely and forever, and nothing he learned about his birth parents changed that truth. Queen Hyuna held him close, and King Taemin wrapped them both in his protective embrace. They sat together in comfortable silence, a family bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Love, choice, and the unbreakable bonds formed through years of shared life. 8 years had passed since Jaiwan's journey to Earth. At 25 years old, Crown Prince Jaiwan had become a respected figure throughout the Dravik Empire. He had led diplomatic missions, resolved conflicts between member worlds, and proven his worth time and again. But nothing could have prepared him for the crisis that was about to test everything he had learned. The Kretak Dominion had been a problem for years, launching small raids on border colonies and testing the Empire's defenses. The Kretak were insectoid warriors, creatures with hard shells and razor-sharp limbs who operated as a hive mind. Their collective intelligence made them predictable in some ways, but devastating in their coordination. For months, Intelligence reports had warned of military buildup, but no one expected what came next. The attack began without warning on a quiet morning. 3 Dravic colonies on the border systems went dark within hours. Communications were cut, defense stations destroyed, and by the time the Empire realized what was happening, the Kretak had already established a foothold. Emergency sessions were called in the royal palace, and military commanders scrambled to organize a response. King Tamine immediately took command, his centuries of military experience showing as he began coordinating the defense. But during a critical strategy session with his top generals, the king suddenly collapsed. His massive form crashed to the floor, sending advisors scrambling in panic. Queen Huna rushed to his side as royal physicians were summoned urgently. The diagnosis was grave. The ancient curse that had prevented dragon fertility had evolved into something worse, a degenerated condition affecting Tamine's vital systems. The physicians explained that the king would survive, but he needed months of intensive treatment and complete rest. He could not lead the military response. He could not even leave his medical chamber without risking his life. The High Council convened an emergency session to decide what to do next. The chamber was filled with the Empire's most powerful nobles, military leaders, and advisors. General Doyen, now elderly but still commanding respect, argued for traditional military tactics. He wanted to gather the entire dragon fleet and meet the Kretak in massive direct engagement, overwhelming them with superior firepower. Lord Sangwoo, once Jaiwan's harshest critic, suggested a different approach. He proposed negotiating with the Kretak, offering them some border territory in exchange for peace. The idea was met with outrage from military commanders, but Sangwoo argued that preserving dragon lives was worth more than empty worlds. Then Commander Juno spoke, his voice cutting through the debate. He reminded the council that they had a crown prince, trained for exactly this kind of situation. Jaiwan had studied warfare under the best teachers, had proven his strategic thinking countless times, and had earned the respect of the military through years of service. Juno stated firmly that Prince Jaiwan should lead the counteroffensive. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some nobles supported the idea, while others questioned whether a human could truly command dragon warriors in battle. The debate raged for hours until Queen Huna entered the chamber. Her presence demanded immediate silence. Despite her worry for her husband, her voice was steady and authoritative as she announced her decision. As regent in the king's absence, she was giving Prince Jaiwan full military authority to lead the Empire's response. Jaiwan accepted the responsibility, though privately he felt terrified. That evening, he was granted permission to visit his father in the medical chamber. King Tamine lay on a specialized bed, his scales looking dull and his breathing labored. Medical equipment surrounded him, monitoring and treating his condition. But when Jaiwan entered, the king's eyes focused immediately on his son. Tamine's voice was weak, but his words were strong. He told Jaiwan that he could see the doubt in his son's eyes, the fear that he was not capable of leading dragons into battle. The king acknowledged that Jaiwan was right about some things. He could not breathe fire or tear through enemy ships with his claws. He could not survive in the vacuum of space without protection or intimidate enemies with a dragon's roar. But then Tamine said something that changed everything. He told Jaiwan that these limitations were actually advantages. Dragons were conquerors by nature, creatures who faced every challenge head-on, because that was their instinct. But humans had survived on Earth not through strength, but through intelligence and adaptability. They had been prey and predator, had learned to think creatively, to use deception and strategy in ways that dragons rarely considered. That different perspective was exactly what the Empire needed now. Jaiwan left his father's chamber with renewed purpose. He immediately assembled his team. Princess Yuna would serve as his diplomatic officer, Master Miho as his strategic analyst, and Commander Juno as his military commander. He also requested access to the complete archives of human military history from Earth's databases, materials that few dragons had ever bothered to study. For 3 days, Jaiwan barely slept. He studied ancient human warfare, tactics used by civilizations that had fought wars for thousands of years. He learned about guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, deception strategies, and asymmetric combat. He analyzed how weaker forces had defeated stronger ones throughout history by refusing to fight on their enemies' terms. The Kretak expected the dragons to respond predictably. They anticipated massive fleet engagements where numbers and hive coordination would give them an advantage. Their intelligence suggested the dragons would gather their forces and charge straight at the invasion, relying on individual strength and firepower. That was how dragons always fought. But Jaiwin had a different plan. He divided the dragon fleet into small, fast squadrons. Instead of meeting the Kretak head-on, these squadrons would harass and retreat, striking quickly and disappearing before the enemy could respond effectively. The goal was not to defeat the Kretak in direct combat, but to draw them deeper into Dravik space, stretching their supply lines and communication networks. Meanwhile, Jaiwin positioned the main dragon fleet near a massive nebula, using advanced cloaking technology adapted from Viralis designs. The nebula's radiation interfered with sensors, making it the perfect hiding place. He then sent false communications that made it appear the main fleet was retreating in disarray, running scared from the Kretak advance. General Doyen watched the tactical displays with growing frustration. To the old warrior, this looked like cowardice. His scales bristled with anger as he watched dragon squadrons flee from battles they could have won. But Commander Juno stood firm, insisting they trust the prince's strategy. The Kretak took the bait perfectly. Believing they had the dragons on the run, they pushed their fleet deeper into Dravik territory, pursuing what they thought was a beaten enemy. Their ships spread out in a confident advance, focusing on conquest rather than defense. Then Jaiwin revealed the second part of the strategy. His intelligence team had discovered something crucial about the Kretak Dominion. Despite their appearance of unity, internal conflicts plagued their society. Worker castes were rebelling against the warrior elite, resentful of being treated as expendable resources. This information had been suppressed by Kretak leadership, kept secret to maintain the appearance of strength. Jaiwin ordered this information broadcast on all frequencies, sent to every Kretak ship and colony. He released evidence of the rebellions, proof of how the warrior caste sacrificed workers without care, and messages of support for the rebel factions. The broadcasts were not threats but revelations, exposing truths that the Kretak leadership had desperately tried to hide. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kretak ships began receiving contradictory orders as different factions fought for control. The hive mind that made them so coordinated began to fracture. Some ships continued the attack, while others hesitated or even turned back. That was when Jaiwin sprang his trap. The hidden dragon fleet emerged from a nebula, appearing suddenly behind the now confused Kretak forces. But instead of attacking the main fleet, they targeted supply ships and command vessels. The dragon squadrons that had been retreating suddenly turned aggressive, coordinating perfectly with the main fleet to cut the Kretak off from reinforcements. The battle lasted 3 days. The Kretak fought fiercely, but their fractured command structure and severed supply lines made coordination impossible. Jaiwin's forces systematically dismantled their invasion fleet, offering surrender terms that were surprisingly generous. Kretak ships that surrendered immediately were escorted to neutral zones rather than destroyed. By the end, the Kretak invasion had collapsed. But more importantly, 2 rebel Kretak factions contacted the Dravik Empire, requesting alliance. They wanted protection from their own warrior caste and offered their territories and resources in exchange. Jaiwin had not only defeated an invasion, but had gained 2 new allied regions without additional bloodshed. When the fleet returned to Draker Prime, the welcome was overwhelming. Citizens lined the streets as Prince Jaiwin's ship descended. King Taemin, recovered enough to stand, was waiting at the palace landing platform. In front of the assembled court, the entire military command and broadcast cameras reaching across the empire, the king embraced his son. Taemin's voice rang out clearly, his strength returning. He declared that Jaiwin had fought like a human and led like a dragon, combining the best qualities of both species. The prince had proven beyond any doubt that he was worthy of the crown he would one day inherit. Even Lord Sangwoo approached Jaiwin privately after the ceremony. The old noble, who had opposed the human prince for so many years, bowed his head respectfully. He admitted he had been wrong, that Jaiwin was exactly the kind of leader the empire needed, someone who could see solutions that traditional thinking missed. That night, Queen Huna found Jaiwin on the palace balcony, looking up at the stars where so many lives had been saved by his decisions. She asked him softly if he ever regretted that the Voralis had brought him to their world. Did he ever wish for a different life? Jaiwin turned to his mother and smiled, genuine happiness in his eyes. He told her that every single day he was grateful. He had lost one home but gained an entire empire as his family. He would not change anything about his life, not a single moment. This was where he belonged, and these were the people he was meant to serve and protect. 15 years had passed since Jaiwin's great victory against the Kretak invasion. Now at 40 years old, he had proved himself as a leader countless times over. The empire had grown stronger and more united under his guidance as crown prince. But King Tameen and Queen Huna, who had ruled for over 4 centuries, felt it was time to pass the throne to the next generation. The decision came during a private family dinner one evening. The king and queen sat with Jaiwin in their personal quarters, sharing a meal as they had done thousands of times before. But tonight felt different. Tameen and Huna exchanged meaningful glances before the king spoke. He told Jaiwin that they were tired, not from weakness, but from a natural completion of a long reign. They wanted to spend their remaining years enjoying peace, watching their son rule, and simply being together without the weight of an empire on their shoulders. Jaiwin protested at first. He told them they were still strong, still wise, and still needed. But Queen Huna smiled gently and explained that this was not about need. It was about trust and readiness. They trusted him completely to lead the empire, and they wanted the joy of seeing him crowned king while they could celebrate with him. The coronation was planned for 3 months later, giving time for representatives from across the galaxy to make the journey to Draker Prime. The event would be the largest gathering in the Empire's history. Invitations went out to hundreds of species and civilizations, including the mysterious Voralis Collective, who had started everything 40 years ago. As the day approached, Jaiwin found himself reflecting on his incredible journey. From a helpless infant who had lost everything to a king about to rule 12 star systems. The boy who had once doubted his place in the dragon world now stood ready to lead it into the future. The morning of the coronation arrived with perfect weather across Draker Prime. The 3 moons had aligned in a rare celestial event that the people took as a good omen. The ceremony would take place in the Grand Plaza, an enormous open space in front of the Crystal Palace that could hold millions of beings. Holographic projections would broadcast the event to every corner of the Empire and beyond. Jaiwin dressed in formal robes that combined elements of both dragon and human tradition. The fabric was woven from materials that could withstand the heat of dragon fire, dyed in the royal colors of gold and sapphire. Over his shoulders hung a cape made from synthetic scales, a symbolic gesture showing his connection to his dragon family. On his chest was the royal seal of the Dravic Empire, something he had earned the right to wear through decades of service. Princess Yuna helped him with the final preparations. She had become more than his closest friend over the years. She was his partner in leadership, his trusted advisor, and the one who understood him better than anyone except his parents. The bond they had formed as children had grown into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. It had been decided that she would be crowned as his queen consort, a decision that pleased both their families and the Empire. As Jaiwin walked toward the plaza, accompanied by royal guards, he passed through corridors filled with memories. Every hallway held stories of his childhood, his training, his victories and failures. The palace had been his home for 40 years, and now he would lead from its throne. The plaza was packed beyond capacity. Dragons filled the air above, their wings creating shadows on the ground. Beings of countless species stood shoulder to shoulder, united in this moment. At the front, on a raised platform, stood King Tameen and Queen Huna, looking magnificent in their formal regalia. Beside them was Ambassador Kellen of the Voralis Collective, the same being who had delivered baby Jaiwin so long ago. The ceremony began with traditional dragon rituals, ancient practices that dated back thousands of years. Then came elements adapted for Jaiwin's unique position, acknowledging his human heritage. Master Miho, now extremely old but still sharp-minded, recited the history of the Empire and spoke of the qualities needed in a ruler. Commander Juno retired but present in full military honor, presented Jaiwin with the Sword of Justice, a ceremonial weapon representing the ruler's duty to protect. When it came time for the actual crowning, King Taemin stepped forward. In his claws, he held the crown of stars, the ancient symbol of imperial power. But this was not the same crown that dragon kings had worn for centuries. This was a new crown, specially crafted for Jaiwin, designed to fit a human head, while maintaining all the symbolic meaning of the original. Taemin's voice carried across the plaza as he spoke directly to his son. He said that 40 years ago, he and Hyuna had received an extraordinary gift, a human baby who needed a family. They had not known then what that decision would mean, how profoundly this child would change their lives and their empire. But now they understood that it had been destiny. Jaiwin had taught the empire that strength came in many forms, that leadership was not about physical power but about wisdom, compassion, and the courage to bridge differences. The king placed a crown of stars on Jaiwin's head, and the crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard across the city. Dragons roared their approval, creating a sound like rolling thunder. Beings from countless worlds celebrated together, united in this historic moment. Queen Hyuna approached next, tears streaming down her scaled face. She placed around Jaiwin's neck the pendant of unity, a piece of jewelry that symbolized the bond between ruler and people. She whispered words that only he could hear, telling him how proud she was, how much she loved him, and how blessed she felt to have been his mother. Then it was time for Jaiwin to speak. He stepped forward, now King Jaiwin of the Dravic Empire, and addressed the billions watching across the stars. His voice was calm and confident, carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of service. He began by thanking his parents for everything they had given him. He acknowledged that he stood before them not as a dragon or as a human, but as both and neither. He was proof that family was not defined by blood or species, but by love and choice. He promised that under his rule, the empire would continue to grow not through conquest, but through unity and cooperation. In his first act as king, Jaiwin announced the creation of the Humanity Preservation Initiative. He explained that scattered across the galaxy were small groups of human survivors from Earth, refugees who had escaped the catastrophe or had been living on distant colonies when their home world died. He was sending expeditions to find these survivors and offer them citizenship, protection, and a place in the empire. Humanity would not be forgotten or lost. They would have a home among the dragons. His second announcement created even more excitement. He established the Interspecies Council, a governing body that would give equal representation to all member species in the empire. No longer would dragons alone make all decisions. Every civilization under Dravic protection would have a voice in their shared future. The crowd's approval was overwhelming. Even the most traditional nobles, who might have objected years ago, understood that this was the right path forward. Jaiwin had proven himself too many times for anyone to doubt his judgment now. After the public ceremony ended, there was a private moment in the palace. Ambassador Kellen approached King Jaiwin with something wrapped in familiar glowing fabric, the same Voralis technology that had protected Jaiwin when he arrived as a baby. Inside the bundle was another infant, a human baby girl discovered in stasis on a damaged colony ship. She had no family, no one to care for her. Queen Yuna, newly crowned, stood beside Jaiwin as he looked at the sleeping child. The ambassador explained that the Voralis had been watching over human refugees, and when they found this orphan, they immediately thought of bringing her here. The cycle could continue. Another human child could be given the same gift that Jaiwin had received. Jaiwin felt his heart fill with emotion as he gently took the baby in his arms. She stirred slightly, opened her eyes, and looked up at him with innocent curiosity. In that moment, he understood everything his parents had felt 40 years ago. The desire to protect, to love, to give this helpless creature every opportunity to thrive. He and Yuna decided immediately they would adopt her as their daughter. They would name her Hannah, which meant flower in an ancient earth language, symbolizing new life and hope. She would be raised as a princess of the empire, loved unconditionally, and given every chance to become whoever she was meant to be. King Taemin and Queen Hyuna watched this moment with deep satisfaction. Their son was now passing on the same gift they had given him. The legacy was not just about ruling an empire. It was about love transcending boundaries, about seeing potential in the unexpected, and about building family through choice rather than blood. That evening, as the celebrations continued across Draker Prime, King Jaiwin sat in the royal nursery holding baby Hannah. Queen Yuna sat beside him, and his parents stood nearby watching. The room was filled with the same Viralis technology that had kept Jaiwin healthy as an infant, now protecting another human child in a dragon world. Jaiwin began to sing softly, the same dragon lullaby his mother had sung to him countless times. Hannah's eyes grew heavy, and she drifted toward sleep, safe and loved. As Jaiwin watched her peaceful face, he thought about the incredible journey that had brought him here. He had been given a second chance at life by strangers who became family. He had been raised across species boundaries and taught that love was stronger than any difference. Now he was king of an empire that stretched across the stars, and he had the chance to give another human child the same extraordinary gift he had received. The cycle continued, proving that the bonds of family, the power of love, and the courage to embrace the different were forces that could change the galaxy. In the nursery's soft light, surrounded by the people he loved most, King Jaiwin understood that he was exactly where he belonged. The human baby who had been given to dragons had grown into a king who would ensure that no child, regardless of species or origin, would ever be without a home or family. That was his promise, his legacy, and his gift to the future.